Good evening and welcome back to Nova's Sleepy Tales. Tonight we travel quietly back to a time when America was not yet a country, when 13 colonies stood under British rule, and when the future of a new nation was still uncertain. Our story begins with a man named Benedict Arnold. Today his name is remembered almost everywhere as a symbol of betrayal. But Benedict Arnold was not born a traitor. In fact, before he became America's most famous traitor, he was a brave soldier who risked his life for the American cause. Benedict Arnold was born in Norwich, Connecticut in 1741. As a young man, he became a businessman and worked in the trade of medicines and other goods. He was ambitious, energetic, and determined to succeed. Then, the relationship between Britain and the American colonies began to collapse. By 1775, protests had turned into fighting. The American Revolution had begun. Arnold joined the revolutionary cause. One of his first major military actions came at Fort Ticonderoga, where American forces captured a British fort and valuable artillery. Arnold showed courage and initiative, but he also showed something else that would follow him throughout his life. He wanted recognition. He wanted people to know what he had accomplished. When others received credit, Arnold became angry. Still, he continued fighting. He joined the American campaign in Canada and took part in the attack on Quebec. During the battle, he was badly wounded in the leg. But Arnold survived. He returned to military service and became an important commander. Then came 1777. British General John Burgoyne was leading an army south from Canada, hoping to divide the American colonies. The Americans gathered to stop him. At Saratoga, Benedict Arnold fought with remarkable courage. During the fighting, he rushed toward the battlefield, despite disagreements with his superior officers. Then a British bullet struck his leg. He was badly wounded again. But the American army won. Burgoyne eventually surrendered, and the victory at Saratoga became one of the most important turning points of the American Revolution. Benedict Arnold had helped make that victory possible. Yet instead of feeling satisfied, Arnold felt forgotten. He believed other officers had received credit for his achievements. His body was wounded, but his pride was wounded too. He began to believe that the country he had risked his life for did not appreciate him. At this point, Arnold was still an American hero. He had not yet betrayed anyone, but resentment was quietly growing inside him. And soon that resentment would lead him toward Philadelphia, where money, politics, marriage, and wounded pride would begin changing the course of his life. The hero of Saratoga was still alive, but somewhere ahead, the first steps toward betrayal were already waiting. After the victory at Saratoga, Benedict Arnold expected recognition. Instead, he became increasingly bitter. His leg was badly injured and he spent time recovering. But while his body slowly healed, his anger toward Congress and other military officers continued to grow. Arnold believed that he had been treated unfairly. He had fought bravely. He had been wounded. He had helped save the American army at Saratoga. Yet he felt that other officers were receiving promotions and praise that should have belonged to him. Eventually, Arnold was given command of Philadelphia after American forces regained the city in 1778. Philadelphia was one of the richest cities in the colonies. There, Arnold began living an expensive social life. He spent more money than he could comfortably afford, and before long, he found himself deeply in debt. It was also in Philadelphia that Arnold met Peggy Shippen. Peggy came from a wealthy family with connections to people who had remained sympathetic to Britain. Arnold fell in love with her, and they married in 1779. For a time, Arnold seemed to have everything: a respected military position, a wealthy young wife, a comfortable home. But beneath the surface, his problems were becoming worse. He was investigated over accusations that he had used his position for personal financial benefit. Arnold believed the accusations were unfair. His resentment grew stronger. And then he began doing something that would change his life forever. Arnold secretly opened communication with the British. At first, the messages were carefully hidden, but gradually the conversations became more serious. Arnold wanted money. He also wanted revenge against the people he believed had humiliated him. Then he developed a dangerous plan. He wanted command of West Point, an important American fortress on the Hudson River. If Arnold could secretly surrender West Point to the British, it could become a devastating blow to the American cause. He began communicating with British officials through secret letters. But Arnold needed someone on the British side who could handle the plan. That person would soon be Major John André. André was a young British officer who would become deeply involved in Arnold's secret scheme. Neither man could know exactly how their meeting would end. Arnold believed he was finally going to receive the money and recognition he thought he deserved. But instead, the secret plan would lead to capture, execution, and one of the most shocking betrayals of the American Revolution. The fortress of West Point was waiting, and the American general who had once fought so bravely for independence was now preparing to hand it to the enemy. By 1780, Benedict Arnold's secret plan had become more dangerous. He had successfully requested command of West Point, one of the most important American military positions along the Hudson River. To everyone around him, Arnold was simply another American general, but behind closed doors, he was communicating with the British. Arnold wanted money in exchange for information about the fortress and its defenses. The British wanted to know how West Point could be captured. The man chosen to work with Arnold was Major John André. André was a British officer known for his intelligence and charm. He and Arnold began exchanging secret messages. The plan was carefully arranged. Then, in September 1780, André traveled secretly toward the American lines. He was supposed to meet Arnold and discuss the final details of the plan. The meeting took place near the Hudson River. Arnold gave André information about West Point. But then everything went wrong. The British ship that had brought André could no longer safely take him back. André was now trapped behind American lines. Arnold gave him civilian clothes and told him to travel overland. André began his journey south. He believed he could cross the American lines without being discovered, but on September 23rd, 3 American militiamen stopped him. Their names were John Paulding, David Williams, and Isaac Van Wart. André tried to convince them that he was an American citizen, but the soldiers searched him. Then they found something hidden inside his boot. It was a collection of papers connected to West Point. The discovery changed everything. André was arrested. The papers were sent to American officers, who quickly realized that someone inside the American army had been secretly working with the British. The name Benedict Arnold soon emerged. Arnold had been exposed. When he learned that André had been captured, he understood that his own secret was in danger. He moved quickly. Before American soldiers could arrest him, Arnold escaped toward British territory. The man who had once fought for American independence was now running from the army he had commanded. George Washington was shocked when he learned the truth. He had trusted Arnold. He had respected his courage. And now he discovered that Arnold had planned to surrender West Point. But Arnold was already gone. John André remained in American custody. The British officer had been caught carrying secret military information. Soon he would face a military trial. And while André waited for his fate, Benedict Arnold began a completely new life on the other side of the war. The American hero had become a fugitive, and the name Benedict Arnold was about to become permanently connected with betrayal. John André now stood at the center of the scandal. The British officer had been captured carrying secret papers connected to West Point. The Americans knew that he had entered their lines under a false identity. They also knew that Benedict Arnold had been involved. For George Washington, the discovery was deeply painful. Washington had trusted Arnold. He had seen him fight bravely. Now that trust had been destroyed, André was placed before an American military board. He admitted that he had entered American territory secretly, but he argued that he had acted under orders. The board found him guilty of being behind American lines under a false identity. Washington reluctantly approved the sentence. On October 2nd, 1780, John André was hanged. His death became one of the saddest episodes of the Revolution. Many American officers respected André personally, even though he had been involved in the plot. Meanwhile, Benedict Arnold had reached British territory. He had escaped punishment, but he had lost almost everything he once valued. The Americans now considered him a traitor. Arnold expected the British to reward him generously. Instead, they gave him money and a military position, but he never received the enormous reward he had imagined. He became a British officer, and now he would fight against the country he had once defended. Arnold participated in British operations in Virginia and later attacked American positions, but his new life was not comfortable. British officers never completely trusted him. To them he was the former American general who had betrayed his own side. Americans hated him, the British used him, and Arnold slowly discovered that betrayal had not given him the respect he wanted. It had only left him caught between two worlds. His wife, Peggy, remained with him. Together, they eventually left America and moved to Britain. Arnold tried to rebuild his life through business, but his reputation followed him wherever he went. He sometimes defended his actions, claiming that he had been treated unfairly by the Americans. He believed his sacrifices had been forgotten. But nothing could change what he had done at West Point. The war continued for a little longer. Then, in 1783, Britain recognized American independence. The United States was now a new nation. George Washington and the American soldiers had helped create it. Benedict Arnold had once been one of them. But he would not share in their victory. Instead, he would spend the rest of his life watching from a distance as the country he had helped fight for continued to grow. And as the years passed, something became clear. Arnold had wanted money. He had wanted recognition. He had wanted revenge. But what he received instead was something he could never escape. His name became a warning, and the story of his betrayal would survive long after the Revolutionary War had ended. Yet Benedict Arnold's story was not finished. There were still years ahead of him, years in Britain, years of disappointment, and finally a quiet death far from the country where his name had become infamous. After the Revolutionary War ended, Benedict Arnold and Peggy Shippen began a new life in Britain. Arnold had escaped the punishment he might have faced in America, but he had not escaped his reputation. In Britain, he tried to rebuild his career. He entered business and hoped that people would eventually forget the events of the Revolution. But that never happened. In America, his name had already become a symbol of betrayal. Even people who remembered his earlier courage could not forget what he had done at West Point. Arnold sometimes tried to explain himself. He argued that he had been treated unfairly by Congress and by fellow American officers. He believed his military achievements had been ignored and that his sacrifices had not been properly rewarded. But his explanations could not change the most important fact. He had secretly offered an American fortress to the British. He had betrayed the army he once commanded, and he had done it for money and personal reasons. As the years passed, Arnold's life became increasingly quiet. He lived in Britain with Peggy and their children. He occasionally wrote letters defending his actions, but he never regained the respect he had once enjoyed. There was a strange irony in his life. Benedict Arnold had once desperately wanted to be remembered. He had wanted honor. He wanted people to recognize his courage and his military achievements, and he certainly became unforgettable. But history remembered him for the opposite reason. His greatest achievements became overshadowed by his greatest mistake. Arnold had helped capture Fort Ticonderoga. He had fought in Canada. He had defended the American position on Lake Champlain. He had played an important role at Saratoga. He had been wounded in battle. Yet when later generations heard the name Benedict Arnold, they rarely thought about those achievements first. They thought about betrayal. Arnold died in London on June 14, 1801, at the age of 60. He was buried in England, far from the American battlefields where he had once fought. By then, the United States had become an established nation. The Revolution was part of history. George Washington had become a symbol of American leadership, and Benedict Arnold had become something else entirely, a warning. His story showed that a person could be brave and still make terrible choices. He could fight for a cause and later turn against it. He could achieve greatness and then destroy much of what he had built. Perhaps that is why his story has survived for so long. Benedict Arnold was not simply a villain from the beginning. He was a complicated man whose ambition, pride, financial troubles, and resentment slowly pushed him toward a decision that changed everything. The tragedy was that he had already achieved what many soldiers could only dream of. He had become a hero. He had earned a place in American history, but he could not accept the feeling that he had been overlooked, and in trying to prove his worth, he destroyed the very reputation he had spent years building. The guns of the Revolution had long fallen silent. The soldiers had returned home. The colonies had become a country. But one name remained connected to the darkest kind of disloyalty: Benedict Arnold. And perhaps the quietest lesson in his story is this: sometimes a person's greatest enemy is not the army standing across the battlefield. Sometimes it is the anger, pride, and resentment growing quietly within. Benedict Arnold spent years fighting battles for America, but in the end, it was one decision that defined how history would remember him. The hero became the traitor, and the traitor became immortal. Good night, and rest well. As the years passed, Benedict Arnold tried to live quietly in Britain. He and Peggy Shippen built a family and continued their lives far from the battlefields of the American Revolution. But distance could not erase the past. Arnold's name followed him. In Britain, he was often remembered as the American general who had changed sides. In America, his name became something even more powerful, a symbol of betrayal. The irony was that Arnold had once been one of the Revolution's most courageous soldiers. He had fought at Saratoga. He had been wounded. He had risked his life for the American cause. But when people remembered him, those achievements were increasingly pushed into the background. Arnold sometimes complained that history had treated him unfairly. He believed that his enemies had destroyed his reputation. But there was one thing he could never escape. He had made the decision himself. Nobody had forced him to communicate secretly with the British. Nobody had forced him to plan the surrender of West Point. His anger may have influenced him, his financial problems may have influenced him, his desire for recognition may have influenced him, but the final choice had been his. As the new United States continued to grow, Arnold remained outside its story. He could no longer return home as a respected American. Even when he wrote to American officials, there was little chance that the old trust would return. The country had moved forward. Arnold had not. He remained connected to a war that had ended years earlier. His later life was filled with business attempts and financial difficulties. Some ventures succeeded for a while, others failed. He never became the wealthy and powerful man he had imagined he would be after betraying West Point. Instead, his later years were relatively quiet, and perhaps that quietness made his story even more haunting. There were no great victories at the end, no final battlefield, no moment when he could repair his reputation, only the slow passing of time. The Revolutionary War became history. The soldiers who had fought in it grew old. A new generation of Americans was born. Most of them had never seen Benedict Arnold, yet they knew his name. They learned that he had been an American general who betrayed his country. The story became part of American language itself. To call someone a Benedict Arnold eventually became a way of calling that person a traitor. It was a remarkable transformation. A man's personal name had become a word, and that word would survive for centuries. Arnold himself could not have known how long his name would live. He probably wanted recognition during his lifetime. Instead, he achieved a different kind of immortality. His story became a warning about pride, resentment, and the consequences of betrayal. And as his life slowly moved toward its final years, there was no dramatic return to America, no forgiveness, no great reconciliation, only the memory of a man who had once stood among the heroes of the Revolution, and who later chose a path that separated him from them forever. The war had ended. The country had survived. But Benedict Arnold was still searching for a place in a world that no longer wanted him. And his final years would bring him face to face with the one thing he could never escape: his own name. By the final years of his life, Benedict Arnold had become almost completely separated from the country where his story had begun. America was changing. The young republic was growing stronger, cities were expanding, and a new generation was building a future that Arnold could only watch from a distance. He lived in Britain with Peggy and their family, but his thoughts often returned to America. He continued to defend himself in letters, explaining that he had been mistreated and that his actions had been the result of years of disappointment. Yet the past could not be rewritten. The name Benedict Arnold remained attached to West Point and the secret plan that had nearly handed the fortress to the British. His military achievements were still real. He had been a courageous soldier. He had fought at Fort Ticonderoga. He had endured the disastrous campaign in Canada. He had fought on Lake Champlain. He had helped turn the tide at Saratoga. But history remembered the betrayal more strongly than the bravery. Perhaps Arnold understood this. Perhaps that is why he continued trying to explain himself. He wanted people to see the whole man, not only the final decision, but history rarely gives people complete control over how they are remembered. Years earlier, Arnold had believed that money and recognition would make his life better. Instead, he gained neither in the way he had expected. The British rewarded him, But they never fully trusted him. The Americans hated him, and the reputation he had once wanted became impossible to recover. In the years that followed, Arnold's health began to decline. He spent more time at home. The man who had once ridden across battlefields now lived a quieter life. His world had become much smaller. On June 14th, 1801, Benedict Arnold died in London. He was 60 years old. His life had begun in the American colonies. He had fought in a revolution. He had become a general. He had been wounded. He had helped win a major American victory. Then he had betrayed the country he once served. And finally, he died far from the land where his story began. His burial took place in England. There was no triumphant return to America, no public celebration, no final moment of forgiveness, only the quiet end of a complicated life. But the story of Benedict Arnold did not die with him. It continued through books, classrooms, paintings, monuments, and the memories of generations. His name became a permanent part of American history, and perhaps that is what makes his story so powerful. Benedict Arnold was not simply a man who chose the wrong side. He was a man who had once stood on the right side and had already achieved greatness. His downfall came after he had proven his courage. He did not lose everything because he was weak. He lost it because his ambition, anger, and resentment became stronger than his loyalty. That is why his story still feels strangely human. People can understand disappointment. They can understand feeling ignored. They can understand wanting recognition. But Arnold's story reminds us that those feelings can become dangerous when they control our choices. He wanted the world to remember him. It did. But history remembered him in a way he never wanted. Not simply as a soldier, not simply as a general, but as Benedict Arnold, the traitor. And now, as the story of his life slowly comes to an end, we can finally look back at the entire journey. From a young man in colonial Connecticut to a brave American officer, to a wounded hero at Saratoga, to a frustrated general, and finally to the man whose name became a symbol of betrayal. Only one final chapter remains, and in that final chapter we will look at the strange legacy Benedict Arnold left behind, and why, more than 2 centuries later, Americans still remember his name. Long after Benedict Arnold was gone, the American Revolution continued to grow into legend. The battles became stories, the soldiers became heroes, and the new nation created its own history. But among all those names, one remained unusually difficult to forget: Benedict Arnold. His story survived because it contained something rare. It was not simply a story of war. It was the story of a man who stood on both sides of the same conflict. At the beginning of the Revolution, Arnold had believed strongly enough in the American cause to risk his life. He fought when the future was uncertain. He endured terrible conditions. He was wounded more than once. And at Saratoga, he helped the Americans achieve a victory that changed the course of the war. Yet years later, he secretly negotiated with the British. That contrast became the heart of his legacy. Americans could remember his courage, but they could never separate it from his betrayal. Over time, the details of his life became less important to ordinary people. What remained was his name. Benedict Arnold became a phrase used to describe someone who betrayed a trusted cause. His name carried a meaning far beyond the man himself. But history also leaves us with a difficult question. Was Benedict Arnold always destined to become a traitor? Probably not. His life had many turning points. He experienced financial troubles. He believed that political leaders had treated him unfairly. He was angry about promotions and recognition. He felt that other officers received credit for achievements he believed belonged to him. And slowly, those frustrations changed the way he saw the world. Instead of seeing himself as part of a difficult struggle, he increasingly saw himself as a man surrounded by people who had wronged him. That change in attitude mattered. His betrayal did not suddenly appear from nowhere. It developed over time. One disappointment followed another. One resentment became another. Eventually, he made a choice that could not be undone. And that may be the most important part of his story. Benedict Arnold had choices. He could have continued serving. He could have walked away from the army. He could have accepted disappointment. Instead, he chose revenge and secret cooperation with the enemy. The consequences lasted far longer than he did. Even today, historians continue to study Arnold's life because it reveals something about the complicated nature of human beings. People are rarely only heroes or villains. A person can be brave in one moment and make a terrible decision in another. A person can sacrifice everything for a cause and later turn against it. Benedict Arnold was both a hero and a traitor. But history ultimately remembered the choice he made at the end, and perhaps that is why his story remains so powerful. His greatest achievements happened before his betrayal. Yet his greatest mistake became the thing that defined him. The man who wanted recognition received it. The man who wanted to be remembered became unforgettable. But the price of that remembrance was enormous. His name would survive not as a symbol of courage, but as a warning. And somewhere in the quiet pages of American history, Benedict Arnold remains standing between two worlds. The brave general he once was, and the traitor he chose to become. Only one question remains. What would America remember if Benedict Arnold had never betrayed it? To understand that, we must return once more to the beginning, to the young soldier, to Saratoga, to the wounded man who believed his country had forgotten him. Because before the betrayal became history, it was simply one man's decision. And that decision changed everything. And so the story of Benedict Arnold comes to its quiet end. He began his life as a young man in colonial Connecticut long before the United States existed. He became a businessman, a soldier, and eventually a general in the American Revolution. He fought for the American cause when victory was far from certain. He risked his life at Fort Ticonderoga. He marched through the difficult Canadian campaign. He fought on Lake Champlain, and at Saratoga he helped lead American soldiers toward one of the Revolution's most important victories. He was wounded. He suffered. He sacrificed. For a time, Benedict Arnold looked like the kind of man future generations would remember as a hero. But something changed. He became convinced that his country had failed to appreciate him. He became angry about promotions. He became frustrated by accusations and financial problems. And slowly his resentment became stronger than his loyalty. He met Peggy Shippen. He began communicating secretly with the British. Then came West Point. Arnold offered to surrender the fortress to the enemy. His plan was discovered when British officer John André was captured carrying secret papers. André was executed. Arnold escaped. From that moment there was no return. The man who had once fought for American independence now fought against the country he had helped defend. When the war ended, Arnold lived in Britain. He tried to rebuild his life, but he could not rebuild his reputation. He died in London in 1801, far from the country where he had first dreamed of success. Yet his story remained, and perhaps that is the strange power of history. A person's life ends, but the choices they make can continue speaking long after they are gone. Benedict Arnold wanted to be remembered as a great man. In a way, he succeeded. His name became one of the most recognizable names of the American Revolution. But it became famous for a reason he never wanted. He became a symbol of betrayal. Still, perhaps we should remember more than the betrayal itself. Before Benedict Arnold became a traitor, he was a soldier who showed extraordinary courage. His story reminds us that human beings can be complicated. A person can possess courage and pride, ambition and loyalty, greatness and weakness. The same qualities that help someone rise can sometimes become the qualities that bring them down. Arnold's life is therefore more than a story about an American general who changed sides. It is a story about choices. It is about what happens when disappointment turns into resentment, when resentment turns into anger, and when anger finally becomes action. The American Revolution created a new country. Benedict Arnold helped create that country before he turned against it. That contradiction is what makes his story unforgettable. The battlefields are quiet now. The soldiers are gone. The old forts remain only as pieces of history. The young republic became a powerful nation, and Benedict Arnold became a name known across generations, not because he was the greatest general, not because he won the most battles, but because he showed how quickly a reputation built over years can be changed by one terrible decision. Perhaps as we leave his story tonight, that is the quiet lesson worth carrying with us. Honor is not created in a single moment, and it is not lost in a single moment either. It is built through countless choices. Benedict Arnold made many brave choices, but eventually he made one choice that changed everything. And history never allowed him to escape it. His story is over. The guns of the Revolution have been silent for more than 2 centuries. The 13 colonies are now part of a vast nation, but the name Benedict Arnold still remains. A hero, a general, a traitor, and finally a reminder that the greatest battles are sometimes fought not on distant battlefields but quietly within the human heart. Thank you for spending this quiet hour with Nova's Sleepy Tales. Good night. Rest peacefully and let the old stories of history slowly fade into the silence of the night.